unless you're a vegetarian who subscribes to that philosophy from a moral standpoint, you're likely wondering how animals could matter to the same scale as humans. Sure, we think animal cruelty is wrong, but at the end of the day, we are natural omnivores. Animals like cows and pigs don't appear to be as intelligent as we humans. Now, I'm not here to convince you to be a vegetarian, or vegan, or that you should never again eat a caniac combo. But this Australian man, Peter Singer, he's going to try his best. In understanding Peter Singer, it is first extremely important that we understand the ethical theory that Singer prescribes himself to. Peter Singer is a utilitarian. Utilitarianism, devised by a dead British guy, Jeremy Bentham, is one of the most influential ethical philosophies in the Western tradition. Bentham says that how we devise an ethical action, one that is objectively good, is based on whether the total happiness or pleasure is greater than the total suffering or pain. Let's visualize this with something you're probably familiar, the trolley problem. Bentham's argument is that, of course, you pull the lever to save the 5. More total happiness is being achieved. Okay, wait, but now let's say this one guy is famous, and his death would cause a lot of unhappiness in the world, probably more than these 5 schmucks. Actually, let's say there are 5 dogs on the track, and you could let them die, or 1 human. Devising the consequences, which is the only thing that really matters to utilitarians like Bentham and Singer, is called the utility calculus. Let's go back to Peter for a minute. He's going to say that we must include animal pleasure and suffering when we perform this utility calculus. Singer points to a specific quote from Jeremy Bentham that goes, "The question is not, can they reason, nor can they talk, but can they suffer?" Now, this quote is actually pulled from a passage where Bentham states that as race does not affect one's consideration for happiness, perhaps having a tail, having feathers, or a trunk one day will also not be a differentiating factor. Now, the quote about suffering, Singer rolled with his man Bentham. Peter Singer is going to say, well, when we consider our own interests over someone else's based on their race, we call that racism. But what if we as humans are committing a similar evil to non-human animals? Let's call it speciesism. Speciesism is a key term in Singer's philosophy. He says, quote, "Racists of European descent typically have not accepted that pain matters as much when it is felt by Africans, for example, when it is felt by Europeans. Similarly, those I would call speciesists give greater weight to the interest of members of their own species when there is a clash between their interests and the interests of those other species. Human speciesists do not accept that pain is as bad when it is felt by pigs or mice as when it is felt by humans." Wow. Perhaps this quote resonates with you, or perhaps you believe it undermines the true evil and atrocity of Eurocentric racism. Whichever it is, it's a powerful quote and one that is integral to Singer's idea of speciesism. Now let's go back to the trolley problem, the one with the 5 dogs and the 1 human. You might be thinking that Singer is going to say, run over the yuppie and release those puppies. Now you might assume this because if we're equally weighing the lives of the humans and the dogs, there's 5 dogs and 1 human, and so the utility calculus presumably would say 5 is greater than 1 and we need to save the 5. And well, you might actually be wrong in this assumption. You see, Singer accounts for the different levels of suffering that humans and non-humans can experience. Humans might have a greater capacity for psychological torment than non-human animals. And this is without mentioning that the utility calculus has to include all, and the presumed friends and family, or even just humanity at large, would likely be more sad about a human death than that of 5 dogs. This is what Singer calls equal consideration. Equal consideration can be summed up with an example he personally gives. Let's say you slap a human baby quite forcefully. This would, inevitably, cause a large deal of suffering to the baby, who, as an infant, is quite sensitive to touch. Now let's say you slapped a horse with the same force as with the baby. A horse would likely not feel a great deal of pain from that same slap. But Singer says, let's suppose that you could inflict the same deal of pain onto the horse as you did with the baby, He says that perhaps there's a large stick that would roughly equate to the same deal of relative pain. This is what Singer means by equal consideration. If you're wondering how vegetarianism flows from these arguments made by Peter Singer, we can for a moment look to American philosopher James Rachels. James Rachels lays out, based on Singer's reasonings, what he calls the basic argument for vegetarianism. The argument consists of 5 parts and is as follows. Causing pain must have a good reason. Rachels says that his doctors administer shots to his children. Keeping them healthy is a good reason to administer this pain. Premise 2, the modern meat industry causes immense suffering to animals. We can generally agree that this is true. Premise 3, we eat meat because we like the taste of it, not because we must. And premise 4, liking the taste is not a good reason. In the conclusion, we should stop eating meat and become vegetarians. Based on Peter Singer, this is, as Rachel says, the basic argument for vegetarianism. Now technically, this is a more generalized argument that one could appeal to anyone with, without relying on utilitarianism, although here it's presented in the context of weighing pain and pleasure. Let's look at some common objections. Firstly, let's look closer at premise 2. The modern meat industry causes immense suffering to animals. A society could, in theory, forego ever making it to the vegetarian conclusion by amending the problem proposed in the premise, factory farming. If somehow we eliminated pain and suffering, at least to some great enough point, it still follows that we could eat meat here. More objections include going all the way back to the beginning of our Peter Singer adventure. Let's say we're able to place moral worth on something other than pain and pleasure, like rationality. Someone like Immanuel Kant here would do that. Finally, there are a ton of objections that come from a utilitarian perspective. Stephen L. Davis, he calculates that agriculture causes more animal death than the meat industry, be it by mangled mice, gophers, and other critters. Do you buy the basic argument for vegetarianism? Why or why not? There are also plenty of other solid arguments out there for vegetarianism that I wasn't able to cover. And thanks for watching.